Hello and welcome to the end of week one on our Unleash Your Potential Innovation and Enterprise course. My name's Dave, I'm one of the course tutors, and we provide these videos at the end of each week in the course just to really reflect on some of the comments and questions that you as learners have been asking and interacting with over the course of the week. Trying to pull out a few threads, answer a few questions, resolve any difficulties and help navigate you forward on the programme. So firstly, thank you to all those of you who have come and got involved, who've introduced yourselves, you've added resource profiles, you've contributed Museums of Curiosity, fantastic stuff. You've been answering our questions, you've been answering each other's questions, you've been asking questions, brilliant. You'll get so much more from the programme if you engage in that sort of social aspect to it. You will learn as much from other people on this programme as you do from us. There are people on this programme from all over the world. There are young people, there are older people, there are students, there are professionals. You can learn so much just from interacting with each other, let alone the course materials themselves. So, thank you for getting involved. If you haven't gotten involved yet, try and get involved. You've still got 3.5 weeks or so in which we're still around on the course to interact with. Make the most of it. I want to pick up on a few things that we talked about this week on the programme that seem to have been kind of real highlights. So the camera case study provoked some great discussion, and I just want to pick up on 3 key themes that came out of it. One was the observation that innovation isn't just about big discoveries. It's about small steps, lots of interconnected parts, and as George says, innovation acts sort of symbiotically. Yeah, absolutely. It's lots of little bits interacting with each other, and you're never quite sure where the real breakthroughs are going to come. But sometimes it's very incremental, but sometimes those increments kind of build together into something more radical. A second point. So we talked about Kodak getting it all wrong with digital photography. Did they? Well, in hindsight, yes, you could absolutely argue that. But in terms of Kodak making that decision at the time, why would you back digital photography over film? Because digital photography was clearly not as high quality at that point. Actually, if you made all of your money from selling film, again, why would you go digital? If you've got lots of staff, lots of resources, lots of assets in a business built up over time, all vested in film, why would you disrupt all that when you're not necessarily sure it's going to catch on? So actually, it's easy to say in hindsight that Kodak did get it all wrong. But at the time, actually, they probably made a series of reasonably sensible decisions. But that didn't work out. And it's interesting to think about which companies we know today are going to find themselves disrupted in the next 5 to 10 years. So part of that disruption is this third piece, which is unintended consequences of innovation. Is all disruption good? Like, we create one thing, but it destroys something else. If any of you have been out walking the streets or on the underground or on public transport and just people don't talk to each other anymore, people are just staring at their devices, is that a good thing? Facebook are being hauled in front of governments and asked to explain how they've unleashed the subversion of democracy. That, I'm sure, isn't what Mark Zuckerberg was thinking when he started FaceMash that became Facebook back in the day. But there are unintended consequences to innovation, and not all organisations and companies are ready to wrestle with what they've unleashed. Interestingly, going back to the camera, we talked about image manipulation, trust. Yeah, huge issues. Tegan, thank you Tegan, made the point about, well, actually, does photography have a link to the rise of celebrity culture? And paparazzi, yeah, absolutely. Was that what Henry Fox Talbot and others were thinking about when they created the camera? Absolutely not. But unintended consequences will occur. The timeline had lots more great discussions. George, again, highlighted the role of the law in innovation. And yeah, absolutely. Having lawyers and the law and legal systems meant that things like standards can be applied within innovation and invention. So actually one of the most important things in digital photography was codifying things like JPEGs. Actually, can everybody work to the same sort of formats and codes? And obviously if you invent something and you spend a lot of time and money and love inventing something, you don't want anyone to be able to copy it too easily, too soon. So intellectual property becomes an important thing. But also intellectual property can stop other people making useful and relevant discoveries. So actually, Henry Fox Talbot's litigiousness about his invention of the photographic negative actually is now believed to have stymied other camera innovations for quite a long period of time, whilst he was still threatening to take people to court. Scott made the point that not every great invention catches on, because not all of them get public support. Not everybody seems to want some of those inventions. And that's because there's a difference between invention and innovation. So invention is new ideas come forward, but they don't have to be adopted. Innovation requires both adoption of an idea and then an impact that results from it. So innovation changes things. Invention is, okay, here's an idea, but it may not catch on. Or it might not catch on today, it might catch on in the future. So Charles Babbage and the computer would be a good example of something that occurred well after the era in which he invented it. The Bristol case studies, another great set of discussions. Clearly lots of you found different individuals in that set inspiring and motivating, and that's what we intended. Lots of you seem to have found Chloe in particular really inspiring. And I think part of that is Chloe comes across as an almost accidental entrepreneur, that she didn't necessarily set out to make a huge amount of money or to particularly kind of change the world, but she saw a problem and she's tried to solve it. And she's managed to galvanise herself and a team and some resources into actually trying to solve a problem. And I can absolutely see why that's quite an inspiring and motivating case study. But one thing is true of all of those case studies, it's that actually they acted on their ideas. And if you're looking for a simple distinction between entrepreneurs and everybody else, it's that entrepreneurs did something about their idea. And that may or may not have been successful, but they have managed to persevere and push on and make something happen. So that leads us into perceptions of innovators. And Sophie makes the point that actually even small contributions count as innovation. Yeah, going right back to that first point that I made about the camera, it's not just about big leaps forward, it's about often very small incremental steps that lead up to innovation. You can get very hung up on waiting for the big idea, but you'll never do anything. How do you actually mobilise all those small ideas that you have to create change? That is all about innovation. And she also, again, thanks Sophie, highlighted some characteristics of innovators. So risk-taking. Now interesting, when you talk to a lot of innovators and entrepreneurs, they don't talk about it as risk-taking, they talk about it as calculated steps. Now to anyone else in the general population, what they did might look like a risk. But because they've got a sense of kind of domain knowledge, it doesn't feel like a risk. It feels far more calculated. But Sophie also highlighted flexibility and responding positively to failure. And I think those are linked. That ability to be able to sort of think on your feet, to stay agile, to change, to adapt, and to respond well when things don't go according to plan. Real hallmarks of good, innovative and entrepreneurial behaviour. You might want to have a look at some of the Sarasvati references about effectuation theory. There's a link to some of it at step 1.10. Really rich territory for thinking about entrepreneurial behaviour. And also thanks Evelyn for talking about perseverance. Yeah, actually sometimes the difference between being an innovator and not being perceived as an innovator is that you just kept going. That actually they weren't failures, they were just small speed bumps on the road to success. And we will come back to a big discussion about fast failure, failing forward in week 4 when we talk about the lean startup method, which absolutely embraces failure. One of the habits that a lot of you all talked about that you found quite challenging was, how do I embrace failure? Well, we'll talk about that when we get to lean, but equally, it's also perspective. I would argue that actually it's not about learning from catastrophic failures. You are failing every single day, dusting yourself up and picking yourself back up again. It's called life, it's called improvisation. All of us are improvising at our daily lives all the time. But we don't tend to always reflect on it too well. Equally, I think the same is true of creativity. Lots of people get very hung up about not being very creative, but actually you spend all day creatively improvising your way through all kinds of situations. And actually, if you put that frame on, you are both creative and failing all of the time. And it's about how you respond to failure with creativity to continue to move forward. So, that leads us into some of the stuff we talked about in terms of kind of creative habits and creative profiles. Now, the way that we profile creativity in the course is a very crude measure. However, it's really just pointing out to you that there are different ways to be creative. There are different styles of innovation, and there is no right type. Every innovative organisation needs people who are accelerating away with new ideas. It needs people to have vision. It needs people to find problems and to solve those problems. And it needs people to go, hang on, are we trying to do the right thing here? Like, is this really going to get us somewhere positive? So all of those types are really vital to a good innovative process. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks again for your participation. It's so good to have you on board. Do stay involved. Do keep asking us questions. Do keep responding to each other. It's hugely appreciated. Now, you're moving on to week 2, which is all about problems. And I will see you again at the end of week 2. Good luck.